I finally did it. I got a Bambu. Y'all been telling me, get a Bambu X1, and you know, new printers come out a whole bunch, so I was very reluctant, but now I got one. And I love it. So far, at least. So far. I've had, let's see, this is my 9th printer, I suppose. I've had quite a few over the years. All sorts of them, you know, various Enders, various mono prices. Let's see, what other, we've got the Sovals. I never went for a Prusa just because I did enough research that I figured that having somebody kind of like pre-build something that is essentially just like a lot of the other lower cost printers, it was no advantage for me. If I'm going to be working on a printer, then, you know, I'm going to be working on a printer. It doesn't really bother me. But the Bambu is one that hopefully I won't really have to work on. And I can tell from just the first prints that I have done of at least my own designs that it's going to take hardly any tuning, but at the same time, it is still a 3D printer and it will have the same issues that all 3D printers have. So let's look at some of the first prints that I did. We're going to talk about the differences between these and some of the old prints that I did on the Soval SV01. So these are a fan adapter, essentially. This is an adapter for a 120 millimeter fan to a 140 millimeter fan on my heaters. And it works just fine. This was printed on the SV01. I did use a 1 millimeter nozzle, which does change some of the features on here. And I used a higher layer height, but a lot of the, just like the little features on here, they're kind of, you know, maybe not the best, let's say, you know, like the walls on these holes. It's like just a little off when it boils down to it, just a little off. Now I did add one change to the slicing besides being a little bit thinner and also using a smaller nozzle size. I added the, what's it called? The smoothing, you'll probably know what it's called in the comments. The surface, it goes over without printing any extra material. Ironing, that's what it's called. So I did add the ironing to it, which I should have tried on this to have a really good comparison. But what I can tell you, you can just hear between the old printer right there, and there's gaps. You probably won't be able to see them on camera, but there's probably a ½ millimeter gap, maybe a full millimeter gap between these two. And the way that this is we have two solid surfaces that they bolt on, and then they need to bolt to each other as solid surfaces. And then the two that I printed on the Bambu with ironing it's super smooth, very smooth. So both sides, you know, a perfect finish on the back, pretty much a perfect finish on top. They're going to mount together extremely well. And it's, real pleased, really pleased with it. Now, just like any printer, there are going to be a little issues. So we look on the inside of this guy right here, and there's a little bit of like little bits here and there. So it wasn't absolutely perfect, but this is PETG that has been sitting out. It is full of moisture, and this is how much stringing that we had. I can tell you on these, there was a lot more stringing, and I spent a lot of time trying to tune the stringing out of that. Now, of course, again, 1 millimeter nozzle, it's going to be a little bit more inherent for stringing versus a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, but it is what it is. There is, I have done nothing to this print. There is no stringing. So, and this was just the stock settings that came with, I used Orca Slicer, which we're going to talk about that more in a minute. So you get a print. This is how it comes off the platter. I still have everything enabled on the startup for the printer. So we're going to have this little bit right there. We've got this little bit on the front side, which this is actually a calibration, and you don't need to do this on every print, but I haven't gotten that far to disable it on most prints. So this calibrates your extrusion when you switch out some filament, or if you have like a really humid environment, your filament's going to change a little bit on your extrusion. So this will calibrate, but it takes like an extra 3 minutes, so you know it adds up. And then we've got our print on this build plate. So this is the high temperature plate. This is PETG. On the other side is the engineering plate. I don't know what the difference is. I think it's maybe more texture on that side. And they're flexible. They're steel. They magnetically mount to the table. You shove them in, you put them down, and they're stuck. So very smooth. Now, normally for PETG, I'd be printing on smooth glass, clean glass, no additives, with like a 70 Celsius bed temperature. This is also printed at 70 Celsius. And yeah, it's not quite perfect. There's a couple of little like blobs on the edge here and there that I can see. We could slow down some. The way that I have the settings at the moment, they are based on the cubic millimeters of extrusion for the filament, and then you have your speed of the machine. So in other words, if your filament can't extrude as fast, the machine will know to slow it down because you have extrusion limits set on the filament. And I have these at 13 cubic millimeters per second for my PETG limits, which is pretty slow. It could be maybe a little slower. PETG loves to print slow. Yeah, not quite perfect. Not quite perfect. I think on the first layer we could slow it down a little bit more and we would be fine. So I may do a little bit more on the settings. Yeah, there's one little, two little, three little things here. Sorry. Not sorry. I'm not sorry. Yeah, so just out of the box, they're tuned really well. I'm using Orca slicer though. So the BAMBU slicer is their in-house one. And from what I read everywhere is that you have to connect to the internet to set up your printer. You also have to connect if you want any sort of online features, if you want to, let's say, monitor it from your phone from afar. There's all sorts of things that you can do through the BAMBU online. And previously, everything had to go through the cloud because of this. Now, I did read, I think on the last release, that they got rid of that you can go over local area network. You don't have to connect to BAMBU potentially to set it up first, although I heard conflicting reports about that you would still have to set it up one time only, so you have to connect once to the internet and then set it up. The reason why I talk about this whole process is that my CAD computer does not have internet. It never gets internet. There are no updates to any of the software and it runs extremely well. I have computers from, let's see, 2007. I have a 2007 Windows XP machine that has not had internet for 13 years at this point, and it runs smooth as a top. There's absolutely no problems, no lags. The old CAD software on it is still extremely fast. It still runs some CNC machines on there very well because I do have Mach 3 on there, and I've never had one problem, not one glitch, never. And it's because it has no internet. If it was connected to the internet until they stopped supporting XP, it would have software bloat, it would have all kinds of things, it would guaranteed be slower, and it might be very unstable. I have had a few updates that essentially bricked a computer for my needs to where suddenly SolidWorks would stop working properly, or the slicer software would update and then there'd be problems in it. Now, if I want to do an update, I can always grab a flash drive, I can get some updates, I can pull them back. Or I can always connect to the internet, of course, it's still a possibility, but there are reasons why I keep my CAD computer not on the internet. Besides all of those things, whenever I do contract work for aerospace, you technically aren't supposed to have it connected to the internet. So that's another consideration that I suppose most of y'all won't have to worry about, but it's something that I do have to worry about. So I used Orca Slicer. It is the open source derivative of BAMBU Slicer, which is the open source derivative of Prusa Slicer, which is the open source derivative of Slicer. I have used Slicer and Prusa Slicer. I skipped over the BAMBU Slicer and I went straight to Orca Slicer for this. It did not require internet. It did tell me if you want to, view your stuff online, if you want to use the BAMBU cloud for your STLs and have somebody potentially steal your design work, that yeah, sure, you can still use it, but I said no, and then it just moved on with its life. I sliced to an SD card, I put it in the machine, bam, we're printing. It actually worked. It was easy. I had no problems with it. And I like that it's not connected to the internet. You can call me crazy, please do in the comments below, but I'm not going to connect this thing to the interwebs. What we will do, however, for cloud printing is I'm gonna set a router up right over here that is specifically for that BAMBU machine. It is not gonna be connected to our main internet. It will only be connected to that and to my print or my CAD computer down there. So yeah, I keep pointing at it because it's right down there. So that's going to get around that. And then we can use the cloud cloud-ish, you know, direct connect to printer sort of services, it may require me to connect to the internet once. So I believe what I'm going to do is put everything behind a firewall, and then I'm going to check what's trying to connect to the internet right now. I don't want Windows updating anything on that computer. It runs solid, it runs smooth. I don't want SolidWorks connecting to the internet for anything on that computer because it runs smooth. So I'm going to be careful about it. At the end of the day, I'm going to be careful about it, but I may need to upload, I think it's like an extension pack or something like that so that we can do cloud printing at least. We'll see. I'll try without that first, and if not, we will figure it out. But there we go. That's kind of the first review of the Bamboo so far. It is fast. It is, I'm assuming, closed loop steppers on there because they don't lose sync, and it moves so fast. And yeah, it's going to be really handy. It's going to be really useful. I do have some larger nozzles. I got a 0.8 millimeter nozzle. I also got a standard 0.4. And I must say, when you get the hot ends, they're very inexpensive. It's like 15 to 20 bucks for them. And that's the entire hot end. It comes with essentially the heat block, the extruder block, and your nozzle already on there. So that's nice for the price. Don't get me wrong, that's nice for the price. I also picked up a whole bunch of these build plates. I've got high temperature build plates. We got low temperature build plates. We have the surfaced build plates. We have the smooth build plates. And it's really nice to at least have two so that whatever temperature and type of thing that you're building, you pop it out, you place the new one in there before this even cools down, because you do want them to cool down before you pull them off, especially with PLA. If it's still hot, you pull it out, you try to get it off the surface, and it's gonna bend your PLA permanently, pretty much. You can ruin your object. So you just wait a little bit, you do one of these numbers, they pop off easy as pie. So I know that's a lot of rambling about this, but so far I really do like it. It's got a little bit more checks than what I think I would typically want, so I am going to end up having specific programs only for calibration, the bed calibration, the extrusion calibration, that sort of things, and then I'll just print everything after a calibration. So when I switch out a roll of filament, we'll run the calibration on there, and then I'll print, and it'll be like the normal old printer. But right now, with all the calibration and checks and everything, it's like 10 minutes to prep for a print. And if I'm printing something that is not that long of a print, that really adds up. Like each of these guys is a little bit over an hour. And if I'm printing a whole bunch of them and I've got 10 minutes of wait time every single time I boot the machine, that's just not gonna work, for me at least. I wanna, I want to be a little snappier about it. So there's going to be some learning curve, but all in all, I mean, it's basically like any other printer. The same problems that you're going to have with a normal printer, you can have on this thing, although some of the automation, like the self-leveling and, the Z and everything like that, it's going to make it a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, besides the rapid rates, it's not actually going to be much faster than a normal printer. However, I do think that the quality on this is better just because they have the acceleration and the jerk and everything tuned in, like just on the holes and everything. I can tell it's a lot more round than the old printers were. So looking forwards to it. If y'all do have any questions, leave them down below. I'll do my best to get to them. And in the meantime, have fun printing. Thanks for tuning in. Hee haw, hee haw.
Happy Thanksgiving.